Okay, we're back. Just needed to set up recording and transcription. Hopefully everyone gets the message they'll need to consent. Otherwise, I think your ability to participate might get limited. All right, in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to have a presentation from 12:30 to 1:30. There's probably more time than we'll actually need, but we're going to leave some time for questions at the end. We're going to present on both clean water and drinking water intended use plans and the project priority lists, which are currently on public notice. Take questions at the end. If you are one of our external partners, not a state staffer, if you would please sign in so we can notify you of the final intended use plan. And then starting at 1:30, we will take public comments on the priority lists. So again, we can take questions during the meeting, and then we'll take any formal comment starting at 1:30. You can wrap up the meeting early. If someone wants to provide comment before 1:30, we can certainly accept that. Public comments can be submitted to me by email. That's patrick.monks@vermont.gov. You can also provide them at today's meeting. Our goal is to take in all the public comment, respond to all comments, and have a final intended use plan by early September. Once the final intended use plan and priority lists are adopted, projects that are above the funding line will receive a funds availability letter with the goal about a week after adoption of the final IUP. So starting with some program updates that apply to both programs. For the last 5 years, we've had funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and otherwise known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021, also known as BILL or IIJA. This provided a lot of additional SRF funding on both clean water and drinking water. Each year in the past, we received a base grant, also called the general grant. Under the additional funding on the clean water side, we received a supplemental grant and then like emerging contaminants grant. Same thing on the drinking water side, but we also received lead service line funding. This is the 5th and final year of that extra funding. Starting in 2027, we return to base grants. We have also, over the last several years, Congress has been providing what's known as congressionally directed spending, or CDS, also known as earmarks, and also known as community grants, maybe. The issue related to the State Revolving Loan Fund and CDS is that CDS some years reduces the amount of funding made available to the SRF programs. Congress allocates nationally for all the states SRF funding for a given year. Depending on the year, they have reduced that national allocation by the amount that has gone to CDS awards that are related to clean water or drinking water. It doesn't matter if Vermont pulls down $1 million or $10 million in CDS directly. They look across it nationally. How much was awarded? They take that out of the national allocation, and then Vermont gets its percentage. We get 1% of the national allocation for drinking water and 0.5%. It reduced our base grants this year, roughly cut them in half. That was more than offset by the additional funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law grants. Don't know what'll happen for next year's grant. We are continuing to see a very high level of demand and record loan volume in the programs. Record or near record years the past 2 years. We are planning to transfer upwards of $50 million from the drinking water SRF to the clean water SRF to meet the increased demand. We have seen much higher demand on the clean water side over the past couple of years, and to proportionally fund projects. And when I say proportionally fund projects, what I mean is we looked at the total demand across the two programs and the total available funding, derived that we can fund approximately 44% of total demand, and then we funded 44% on each priority list. And that necessitates the transfer of funds from drinking water to clean water. Some changes in the intended use plan compared to last year. We've moved up our bypass dates. So projects that are above the funding line are eligible to apply for construction funding, provided they continue to make progress and meet readiness criteria. Under previous intended use plans, those projects needed to have their voter authorization and they needed to have their step 3 loan application due May 1. Previously it was June 30th. We moved it up to May 1 this year. The issue is we have some projects that just sit there. Maybe they're going to go, maybe they're not going to go. Meanwhile, we have other projects that are below the funding line that are ready to go. And so we're trying to provide more time for those projects to make use of this year's funding or the given year's funding. We have increase in the amount and types of subsidy on the clean water side. Subsidy is also referred to additional subsidy. It's loan principal forgiveness. Under each grant allocation, there's specific amounts of subsidy that we are required to provide and can provide. This year, we also have unused subsidy from prior years, especially on the clean water side. So that's allowed us to increase the amount of subsidy we're offering so we can make full use of all of that. The draft intended use plans revises the repayment start dates for our planning loans. In the past, it's been 5 years. We moved it up to 3 years, except for projects that aren't intended to result in a capital project like an asset management plan, in which case it would be 12 to 18 months, 12 months for clean water projects, 18 months on drinking water. We received recent feedback from EPA that we're still working with them on whether it needs to be 12 to 18 months for all planning loans versus 12 to 18 months from the submittal of the deliverable, like a preliminary engineering report. So the final will provide some clarity there in the final intended use plan. We also received feedback from EPA on whether or not planning loans need to be on the priority list. We got comment last year on that on the drinking water side, planning loans need to be on the priority list. And so we implemented a process whereby we could add them to the priority list during the year. That was workable because we did not have a funding line. So we could, if a project decided they wanted a planning loan and hadn't submitted a priority list application, we could add them. We have a funding line for drinking water this year, so we're still working through how that's going to work. Planning loans are, we've always referred to them as our project pipeline, to help communities in the early stages of the project get it on track so that we have time to come in and see construction funding. We got comments a couple of days ago that we will also need to do that on the clean water side. That's a challenge. The intended use plans on public notice. We're having a hearing today. What we're going to do there, I really don't know. But again, we'll do our best to have clarity on the final intended use plans. If you've read through the intended use plans, you'll see that we're offering a lot of subsidy for planning projects based on the new information we're getting. It's unclear whether those clean water projects will rank high enough on the priority list to receive funding and to be eligible for that subsidy. So it's a significant wrench in the program at the moment, but we're continuing to review our options and have conversations with EPA to figure out where we're going to go next. All right, so that's sort of the big picture summary on CWSRF. I forgot something. I did. I missed a whole slide. Yep. Start date, planning loans. For manufactured housing communities, we had legislation. We worked on legislation last year that went into effect in early July. We received feedback and our own observations over time that in order on the drinking water side, in order for these communities to receive subsidy, they need to demonstrate their income and demonstrate that user rates are high relative to their income. And often these are small communities within larger towns, and the available published income data is often bigger scale and doesn't identify necessarily what's going on in the manufactured housing community or mobile home community. So we again worked on legislation that allows certain types of manufactured housing communities to categorically qualify for that subsidy instead of having to prove that they are low income and to prove that their user rates are high when those facts are known. There's ample evidence, project after project, survey after survey, showing that that is the case. So these projects will be able to come in and potentially qualify for the maximum subsidy, which is a 40-year repayment schedule, assuming the asset life supports it, a 0% administrative fee, and up to 50% loan principal forgiveness. Our ability to offer loan principal forgiveness is always limited by the terms of the grant and how much subsidy we're allowed to offer. But assuming we have it available, these projects will qualify. And again, it's limited to certain types, nonprofit, resident-owned mobile home parks that are registered with the Department of Housing and Community Development. All right, now moving on to clean water. All right, sorry, this slide's a little text rich, but the intended use plan identifies our sources and then our intended uses for the funds. You'll see there are four columns, but the three columns to the right are the three different grants that we receive. Again, starting next year, in all likelihood, it'll just be the one grant. And then for each grant, we're required to provide match. Currently, it's 20% match on both the general and general supplemental grants. Those are grants. There's no match required for emerging contaminants. The draft intended use plan also identifies CAP grant payments that we're receiving from last year's CAP grants that will come in during the year. This includes time frame of the pre-July because it's from the draft intended use plan. That will again on those two lines we're identifies the payments coming in from last year's CAP grants. Same with repayments, and then investment interest, and then available funds. Available funds are funds from prior repayments and interest that haven't been obligated to loans yet. And then also identifies that we'll be transferring $50 million from drinking water to clean water. The biggest use of those existing sources are the pending loan applications. There are a lot of pending loan applications in both programs. That then gives us what we have available for loans this year, combined the three grants, general, supplemental, and emerging contaminants. We have $78.8 million available for loans. We have a total funding request on the priority list of $212.7 million. So that leaves a funding shortfall of $133.8 million. Now, typically, the intended use plans often do show a funding shortfall. Not all projects on the priority list tend to go forward, but we have seen over the past couple of years, especially last year in the clean water side, that we are making close to full use of all our funds, and that may well be the case this year without the transfer from drinking water to clean water. We would have $28 million available for loans under the Clean Water SRF. We have single projects that are ready to go forward that exceed that amount. We issued loans last year that exceed that amount. So we will be making full use of all funds there. So in the past, projects that are below the priority list could often count on receiving funding. That will be the case to some degree this year. It'll be less so. So jumping back to the priority list and how projects are ranked, we use on the clean water side, we use the environmental protection rule, chapter 2. All priority list applications are ranked according to the criteria in the rule and receive priority ranking points based on 9 categories, including public health, water quality, affordability, and project readiness. We also use those same criteria for calculating the pollution control grant eligibility percentage. And again, that results in the project priority list, which identifies construction projects that are in the fundable range. In terms of subsidy, again, loan principal forgiveness. This table identifies how much subsidy we have under each of the grants. On the general grant, we have 350,700 available for any project. Our subsidy is often broken into what we call add sub anyone, where there are not income qualifications. And then on the clean water side, we're also able to offer some amount of subsidy to communities that meet affordability criteria. On the drinking water side, we refer to those communities as disadvantaged communities. So under the general grant, again, 350,700 available with no restrictions, 526,050 for projects meeting affordability criteria. General supplemental, 5.9 million. So again, a lot of subsidy coming through those bipartisan infrastructure law grants. It's limited to projects that meet affordability criteria. And emerging contaminants, 1,072,000. Under the terms of that grant, all grant funds need to be made available as loan principal as subsidy, as loan principal forgiveness. Again, last year at that funding. This table identifies how we propose which programs we intend to use, where we intend to use the subsidy. The amounts are higher than what was just shown on the previous table because it includes prior year subsidy that hasn't been used yet, obligated yet. So under the general grants, we're proposing to make 846,410 available, no restrictions. That's been our typical approach where we're really trying to, that's the most flexible subsidy. Doesn't have to go to affordability communities, affordability criteria. So we tend to funnel that to planning. We also have another 15.2 million that's available for planning for communities that meet it, but then also construction projects and floodplain restoration projects. Emerging contaminants, all available funding is available as subsidy, and it can go towards either planning or construction. These are offering a little more detail here in terms of what types of subsidy are available. In prior years, we had collapsed the subsidy offerings for planning down. We received some comment before the intended use plan was received externally that there were some specific areas that would benefit from enhanced subsidy. So we've gone back to providing, more granularity in terms of the planning the subsidy offerings. As we look ahead, we should expect much less in next year and future years. Don't have a crystal ball as to what will come through in terms of grants, but we should expect less. For general projects, general planning, we are offering 50% subsidy up to 150,000. For the next 4 village wastewater projects, emerging contaminant projects, regional septic management, flood resilience, it's 100% up to 150,000. For floodplain buyout and restoration, it's up to 250,000 per project, and it depends on whether the project is eligible for FEMA funding and whether they're in a manufactured housing community. Construction subsidy, this is a significant change. We're offering 75% subsidy up to 2 million. I think we were at 50 and 750 or a million last year. So, quite a bit more. To be eligible for the construction subsidy, projects must meet affordability criteria. And emerging contaminants grants, 100% for any eligible project. Qualify for subsidy. On the clean water side, the project must be a municipal project. And subsidies reserved per project upon receipt of a funding application. Qualifications-based selection process is completed. Draft engineering service agreement has been submitted and that met the other readiness criteria. It's not guaranteed until we've approved the loan and issued the project and authorized letter of funding. Continuing funding for natural infrastructure projects. Traditional SRF loans can fund conservation and restoration. We're continuing the interim finance put aside for projects that are seeking funding to acquire conservation easements, etc. And we're also continuing the Water Infrastructure Sponsorship Program, better known as WISPR. Under the WISPR program, traditional municipal clean water SRF projects can sponsor a natural resource project. And the way it works is the municipality's loan, or the municipality can have an additional 10% of loan value, and it can be applied to the natural resource project. In that case, the administrative fee is reduced so that the repayment amount isn't any higher for the borrower. And as an additional incentive, the administrative fee is reduced an additional 0.1%. I mentioned the readiness to proceed criteria a couple times. Here they are. By November 1, projects must submit. This is for projects seeking construction funding. They must submit a complete step 2 final design loan application. A bond vote needs to be scheduled, and a copy of the warning submitted to us by January 31st. They need to have received voter/board debt authorization by May 1, and also submit their step 3 funding application by May 1. Again, those last 2 dates have been bumped up a couple months. Eddie, again, we can take questions on either program at the end. I'm going to move on to the drinking water intended use plan summary. Starting again with the sources table, see we've got 4 grants. General grant, 3.8 million, general supplemental, 24.9 million, lead service line, 27.5. We have yet to apply for the lead service line grant. At the time of developing our grant applications to EPA, we still had funds available from the 2022 grant. We didn't have sufficient demand to apply for the years in between. We do anticipate applying for the lead service line grant in the near future. We are continuing to receive additional demand there. And I'll get into that again in a couple slides. And emerging contaminants grant, 7.7 million. Similar to clean water, state match is required, 20% for the general and general supplemental grants. No match for lead or for emerging contaminants. We're receiving 2025 cap grant payments. And we'll have repayments, 7.4 million, interest, 3.6 million. And then we've got second to last line are our available funds, again, from prior years, repayments, etc. Bottom line has our totals available. From those totals, again, we've got a lot of loans that are currently in progress. Some have been approved and just not yet gone to agreement. And then we have pending applications. Once we deduct for that, and on the drinking water side, we also deduct for the set-asides, we'll have available for non-lead projects, for projects under the general and general supplemental and emerging contaminant grants. We have $53.9 million available and a total funding request of $112 million, leaving a shortfall of $58 million. On the lead service line, assuming we're applying for the grant, we have $29 million available and a $29 million funding request. There's no shortfall there. We don't, in all likelihood, do not have demand sufficient to apply for the full 2026 lead grant. So we'll be soliciting interest amongst borrowers to come in if they have any lead eligible project, apply for the grant. And we can also apply for if we don't apply for all of it this year, we can apply for the remainder or a portion of the remainder next year. We have an additional year to apply for that grant. On the drinking water side, projects seeking construction funding are ranked according to priority ranking criteria identified or described in guidance document 2. On the clean water side, it's the chapter 2 rule. Drinking water side, it's a guidance document. It calculates points based on 6 ranking categories, including the number of service connections, affordability and service area, deficiencies, and compliance. Moving into subsidy, again, very robust subsidy levels that again will be unlikely to see in the near future, in the foreseeable future. Under the general grant, 538,880 available in terms as add sub anyone. 1.3 million available for disadvantaged communities under the general supplemental grant. 12 million also available for disadvantaged communities. Emerging contaminants, the entire grant, 6.6 million is available. The subsidy lead service lines, 50% of the grant, $13.5 million available. This table shows the initiatives that we're going to fund with the subsidy. We're proposing 1.4 million be devoted to planning under the general grant, and 5.2 million to be dedicated to construction. General supplemental, all subsidy, and again, this all similar to the clean water side. This includes any subsidy that was available from prior years that hadn't been obligated as of now. We'll have $16 million available in construction subsidy. Lead service line, 18 million available for both planning and construction, and 6.7 million available under emerging contaminants. How we're going to use it under the general and general supplemental grants, it's 25. This is for planning loans, 25% forgiveness up to $100,000. Lead service line for planning, it's 100% forgiveness up to $100,000 and 50% over $100,000. Again, for disadvantaged communities, emerging contaminants, 100% forgiveness. For construction, under the general grants, up to 50% subsidy. Lead service lines, also up to 50%. And emerging contaminants, 100% subsidy with a $5 million cap. We do have robust levels of subsidy. It is first come, first serve. It's based on the conditions of the grant, and when it's obligated, it's obligated. And emerging contaminants and lead service lines, very specific pots of funding. So when those are used up, they're used up. In terms of readiness to proceed criteria on the drinking water side, and again, this is for projects that are above the funding line on the priority list to ensure that they're making good progress and are going to use get their completed construction application in on time. We apply these criteria. Projects need to submit 90% design drawings to the Drinking Water or Groundwater Protection Division or have a construction permit by December 1 of this year. They need to submit a complete environmental information document by January 1, 2027. Bond vote needs to be scheduled or a copy of the warning submitted by January 31st. The project needs to receive voter/board debt authorization by May 1 and submit complete step three being construction funding application. But this is a pretty significant change for the program. That is the lead service line grant program. In 2025, EPA issued expanded eligibility guidelines that allow more project components or projects to receive lead funding. Under the new eligibility, previously, the grant, as in its name, was intended initially funded lead service line projects. That was recognized that there are a lot of integrated or integral project components outside the service lines that should also qualify. So if the service mains plus the connectors and the service lines are all an integrated project under these guidelines, and if they have substantial lead or galvanized components requiring removal, then the project as a whole for lead service line grant funding. Got a couple other folks in the room who know a lot more about it than I do. So if you've got any questions, we can do a deeper dive on that. Again, this is the final year of all the bill grants, but this is the final year of the lead service line grant. It's really beneficial funding. So we'll be doing a little bit of outreach to see if there's any other additional projects that have yet to come in, but we really want to make full use of this grant while we can. And currently there's no funding line for the lead service line grant. All right, I've been talking to you for a while. So we can move on to questions. Start in the room and move into teams. Any questions in the room? Sorry, if you think of them later. Yes.
Can you give me some context regarding this transfer of $50 million out of drinking water into clean water? Like, that's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
How often does this kind of transfer occur? And I see that when we look at on the drinking water side, I see substantial demand not being met, but we're making this policy choice here to move a substantial amount of drinking water into clean water. And I'd love a little more context and understanding of that one.
Yeah. Again, the idea is we have substantial unmet need on both sides, trying to proportionally fund. But to step back a little bit, the SRF programs have built up significant balances over the years. Each year we develop our priority list, and there are a lot of projects come in, and they don't all end up moving forward. So we apply and receive the full grant amount each year, but we don't approve enough, or we don't have enough projects going forward, getting to the point of loan approval to make full use of those funds. So over time, fund balances have grown and grown. We are, as you know, an SRF program isn't really allowed to just accrue funds. I mean, I think in the past, actually, it was a bit of a overt policy, for SRF programs to plan for increasing demand. Like on the clean water side, we knew this day would come 20 years ago that a lot of the wastewater treatment plants would require refurbishment, and now we're seeing that. So there was a benefit for those funds to accumulate. It wasn't, and it was also done, or just as a consequence of, we have a lot of small borrowers, we have limited, engineering capacity in the state, et cetera. So a lot of projects don't get to the funding line. So balances grew. SRF programs are required to make what's called timely and expeditious use. We should be obligating our entire fund balance each year. If we don't do that, a potential consequence would be that we would not be able to apply for and receive the capitalization grants that we get from EPA. The project priority list needs to show, and the intended use plan needs to show that we will use all our funds. And again, if we don't, there's real risk, and that risk has increased over the past couple of years, based on feedback from EPA. And it's not just Vermont. Multiple other states are in similar boat, but we've been put under and had to develop a corrective action plan to identify how are we going to make full use of all the funds. So, we've been aware, and if you look back at prior year intended use plans, it says we reserve the right to transfer. When we last did, I don't know. There was a different type of transfer, 2020-ish, where 12 million, 13 million? 11 million went from clean water to drinking water. But we're making this move now, again, to okay, what's fair? We've got massive unmet need on both sides. Let's fund it proportionally. We are also seeing that we have stronger demand on the clean water side. The loans, we're moving more loan dollars. We really need to fully obligate and take advantage of these large projects coming through to fully commit all our funds. Okay, this is a revolving loan fund. That doesn't mean the dollars are gone. They go out and then they come back as repayment funds, and then they get loaned out again. That's the way it's supposed to work. So if we were to say, nope, we're going to keep all our funds and drinking water and not transfer, we will not make full use of the drinking water funds in all likelihood. I mean, in any likelihood, it won't happen. So our plan is to, again, transfer those funds so we can make full use of them, so we can keep the program on track. If we were to, if we did not receive cap grants for a given year on the clean water side, that's problematic. We wouldn't have any subsidy. Our ability to staff our program would be reduced because we take a 4% administrative slice, so to speak. But we'd still be able to make loans, right? Because we have repayment funds, we have interest. On the drinking water side, it would be catastrophic. A lot of what drinking water does, and Megan can describe it much better. They administer the Safe Drinking Water Act. The state of Vermont does. Where the program has primacy, so all their programs would essentially cease. All their safe drinking water programs would cease because they would no longer receive the set aside. Set aside is 31% of the grant. So all the programs, a lot of staffing, it would just stop. So it's just not anything we can really take a chance with. We appreciate that it's a pretty profound change, and we don't take it lightly. We just, all things considered, really feel like it's an important move for us to take.
That's really helpful context. I wonder a few other kind of follow-ups with it, if you will. Like,
sure.
So is some of the demand that we're meeting on the clean water side really kind of newer flood resiliency, stormwater, clean water associated with stormwater? Is that kind of added demand that is kind of trying to be met with this transfer out of drinking water? I heard some flood resiliency stuff, some natural resource projects, things that I would put in the kind of the stormwater world versus the traditional clean water world.
Yeah, and all those categories are SRF eligible, just to be clear. We've had the floodplain resilience program in our intended use plan since I started. So last 5 years or so, don't believe we've had any demand for. We've had no projects have come in. The interim finance put aside, that's for land conservation. We can only fund that after all the municipal projects are funded. So no, they're not getting funded. Stormwater projects rarely get up above the funding line. I don't think there's one above the funding line in the draft prior to this. I forget. They don't score as high as the traditional infrastructure projects.
Interesting. Okay.
So that demand is out there, but it's not funded demand, for the most part, at least in terms of stormwater. The other ones, we floodplain resilience program, it was conceived, in the aftermath of some floods, and trying to make options available to manufactured housing communities. Just the need hasn't really manifested itself.
My biggest area of comment, it's probably going to be a common one. The general movement seems like it's kind of out of your hands as far as the desire to have a P-list application submitted prior to planning loans and kind of stopping the rolling application procedure. My name is Jeff. I'm from Aldrich. We see significant problems with this as far as just even filling out a P-list application without doing a PER is challenging. There's how those projects are going to be ranked. There's a lot of questions on our end, and we're kind of concerned. We already see a kind of a difficulty with the engineering staff as far as getting through the reviews that are on their table, and adding that'll be a significant lift at the beginning of every year if every potential project becomes something that we need to throw a planning list in. The surprise was hearing that the clean water program is also considering this, and I understand that this is partially out of your hands, but just wanted to at least make the comment that that's a very concerning direction that you guys are planning on moving with that process. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Agreed. Our program's been chugging along for a really long time the way it has. And it's built to allow those planning loans to come in, without being ranked.
Like,
On the clean water side, our whole chapter 2 rule is really geared towards construction projects. So it's contrary to the notion that we should be making full use of our funds. We should be getting these projects in the door, helping communities, getting them funded, getting them to the stage where they can go to construction. Now we're putting in a big roadblock. We really haven't had enough time to really think it through to see if there's something we can do.
At a bare minimum, a different ranking criteria or something.
Yes.
Because the current form, the way that is, it really relies on the PR in order to kind of fill out, and having that not there is that's going to be a significant time suck for everybody to try to figure all that out. So
yeah, we have more flexibility on the drinking water side, not complete flexibility. Our ranking criteria need to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act, but we've got more flexibility. We can change them more readily.
Understood.
On the clean water side. Unfortunately, it's tied to rule, which is tied to statute. So yeah, it's a puzzle. No, I really appreciate the comment. Yeah,
I could offer another, but I don't want to.
we can jump in and then we'll come back. Okay, Megan, don't want to forget about our friends online. Still with us, Megan? You're muted if you are. There
Yep.
you go.
Yeah, so just building off of that, also significant concern from Burlington, and I think, for all of Vermont about the EPA direction on the planning. And I guess one of my questions, and we'll certainly be submitting a written comment, is whether or not at least any tweaking of the priority points for drinking water, understanding that you have a little bit more flexibility. Is there any chance that that is going to be updated, or do you have a plan potentially for this IUP, or are we just going to kind of be stuck until the next IUP round? Because we have some significant planning projects that, because of the way the priority lists and the priority points are assigned, are well below the funding line, and it's putting a huge wrench in all of our project development.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's one question: is there any chance in heck that there will be a revisitation of the points for this IUP, or would that be something that would only be for next fiscal year? And then I have another question.
Yeah, and we received sort of differing messages on what we were allowed to do on the drinking water side, and we just got some additional information this week, just a couple of days ago. Our hope is to find a solution for this year. So I think the short answer is yes, there's the chance that we'll have it such that we can modify on the drinking water side, modify the priority criteria so you can get funding this year, or planning projects can. I can't commit to that. I can commit that we're going to try.
And then on the clean water side, is there any way, in the upcoming legislative session to cleave the priority list stuff from statute so that we have more flexibility and can be more nimble in the future? Because I anticipate these sorts of changes and these sorts, because of the demand, this could be a frequent occurrence where we're having to rejigger things. And so is there something that requires it to be in state statute?
That's a great question. We may well have some SRF related legislation this year, and I think it would make a lot of sense to include that suggestion. Our priority criteria do need to be there needs a certain level of approval and adoption by the state. I don't know that it has to go to the legislature though. So
right.
We'll definitely run that down though. Thank you.
Yeah, I think more and more of us in this crazy world that we live in, we're trying to get things out of ordinance, get things out of statute so that there can be a little bit more, ability to meet the need in the moment. The other question relates, I believe, to the other commenter about bypass procedures, and particularly if we're going to be in this brave new world of planning projects being on the same list. As much as I sure as heck don't want to fill out more frequent applications for priority lists, having some higher frequency of revisiting the IUP and getting a true determination from a city as to whether or not they're ready to move forward. If for those of us who have significant planning projects, we've got ones where we already have ESAs signed, we're ready to rock and roll, and potentially having to wait until I think May to hear if some other big project above us came in. I mean, we've all played this game for a long time of putting every single goddamn project on the priority list, Burlington included. And how are we going to fix that piece of only getting projects on that list that are going to be above the fundable line that are really ready to rock and roll? And I think that's all I got for right now.
Well, thanks. That's another great question. And that's something we've been, spending quite a bit of time with. And, we would have loved to, as part of this priority list, find a way to just put, quote unquote, shovel ready projects on the priority list. Yet, one, defining that isn't as simple as it sounds. And also we didn't want to make too abrupt a change, understanding that, all our communities and borrowers have adapted to the cycle that we have had for years, and didn't want to pull the rug out from under folks. Looking ahead to next year, I think it's essential that we take, some really big steps in that direction. As funding becomes tighter, as we potentially move to more of a cash flow approach, we need certainty that the projects on the priority list are going forward. So we will impose a higher bar to get on the priority list in the first place, or perhaps have tiers. Exactly what those criteria will be, we don't know yet, but we'll certainly be engaging, you all in that conversation about a process that'll work. So I think it would benefit all of us to have, additional or, more certainty on that.
And I thought of one other question as it relates to your comment that planning loans might need to begin repayment 12 to 18 months, after final deliverable, or even 3 years after final deliverable. Does that mean that those planning loans then wouldn't get rolled into a step 3 loan, right? So usually everything gets rolled in and you end up paying 2% on a planning loan. But it could actually be potentially advantageous to some of us that the planning loan stays alone and gets paid back at that 0% admin fee. Is that what would happen?
I think changing the repayment date doesn't necessarily mean the loans won't be rolled in.
Oh, okay.
It could. And we have the way we've done things the way we've done them for a long time, and there's benefit that is, amending the loan as it goes through the planning, design, and construction phase, and having one loan. It also creates a lot of administrative challenges for us as well, and in terms of reporting. So we've been thinking about potentially moving to standalone loans. Haven't had enough time to fully vet it, and engage again with you all on what that would look like. But it's a possibility that that's the direction we'll be headed. But don't want to surprise anyone, so there will be ample notice. All right, thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Greg.
My comments kind of echo the last two comments, or last two people commenting. If in the brave new world that we're in with ranking planning loans versus construction loans, I'd encourage the division to consider separate funding tables similar to emerging contaminants and lead subsidy, ranking those projects in and around construction projects is going to be very problematic, and comparing those as apples to apples in your ranking is a little misleading, because your rankings don't really facilitate or look at a planning project where we haven't even identified the alternatives for a given project, let alone can tell you those potential impacts and how they affect the scoring. Another issue I see with this change is the bypass procedure only is specific to construction projects. Right now, the way the IUP is written in my determination is none of the planning projects can be bypassed. So if you're on the list, you're on the list, whether you do something or you don't do something. And with the new competitiveness that we've added to planning loans, I think the division needs to look at how they look at readiness to proceed on planning projects, because right now, all of those procedures are really more specific to construction loans. And then I guess I would also just echo Megan's comment about repayment. Fully understanding you guys haven't looked at this. I think it needs to be carefully considered whether tripling the amount of loans per project is what you guys want to do administratively with the strain of staffing and availability of people to take on more than what they're currently taking on right now. I do see there being some concerns there, and that the administrative burden is going to increase due to this 3-year window instead of a 5-year window.
Great. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, we definitely, agree and share the concerns about, both the bypass and readiness, or the bypass criteria, being focused on construction and just the awkwardness of trying to rank a planning project against a construction project. Yeah, we'd love a year to maintain the status quo and then switch over.
Totally.
I just don't know if we're going to have that ability.
Understood.
You have more?
Yeah, I'd like to offer up, but it's more of an observation. I realize it's not something that is within the realm of dealing with, but in the world of lead and copper, operators of water systems have just really endured a pretty heavy lift to try to advance inventories and kind of trying to identify where vulnerabilities are for, within the service lines, within the system. And there's this pot of money that I'm not even sure we fully applied for, I think is kind of what I heard, because we really don't have any kind of active demand for using it. And I was struck by the fact that this money's out there. It's going away, right? We're not going to really have that going forward because it's tied into the, I guess it's like the ARPA stuff, right? Or the
Similar,
right? The infrastructure bill instead, right?
Yeah.
But as we speak, there's this lead and copper improvements rule that's being promulgated, right? And some of us are just starting to try to get our arms around exactly what is really going to be asked of us under these improvements. And it feels like the disconnect is going to result in huge burden to our ratepayers, because it looks like there's potentially a boatload of work coming down the pipe that the drinking water systems are going to need to include after the money's dried up.
We should record that for our outreach.
Yeah.
I just
Absolutely, yeah.
on the ground. I Megan's mentioned this at our quarterlies when we have our kind of a get together with the Greenmount Water Environment, and I've included something in our newsletter, but I've also spent a little time trying to look at what Ben's put out there for what's under these improvements and looking at the EPA website. And there's a monster on the horizon and no money.
Agreed.
And we're going to take $50 million of drinking water and move it to clean water.
Those are just loan, I mean, those are loan
I'm just
dollars. No
trying
subsidies.
to understand the policy choice there and trying to make the connection.
Yeah, again, we can't hold on to that money and wait, and it'll come back, it comes back as repayment spread out over time, but yeah. Yes, but I think, yeah,
Yes, it has been a concern since we learned about the LCRR, which is the lead and copper rule revisions and the lead and copper rule improvements, that the money was here and available before the regulations changed. And it's something we have definitely flagged, but it's not something we have any control over.
On behalf of the operators of these water systems, neither do we.
I know, yes.
If I can just add
Sure.
something to that. So we did apply for the 22 lead grant, and then we applied for the 23 lead grant because we're under certain rules from EPA with the timely and expeditious spending of funding. And because that money was very specifically just for inventories and service lines at that point, we sent the 23 grant back to EPA. And then we are going to be applying for, we did not apply in 24 or 25 because we couldn't demonstrate the demand. People were still working on their inventories. And also that was in 2019 or 2020, that $11 million transfer from clean water to drinking water was specifically for lead service line work. So that went towards primarily Bennington's lead service line replacement. So that was kind of the big full lead service line replacement project in the state. So in that sense, we couldn't take full advantage of the new lead money because we were one of the states that had gotten ahead on some of our biggest project for where we knew where the lead was. So, we have the priority list in here for the 26, and so we have demand for that. But the other factor was on the slide with the lead. Patrick noted that some of the eligibility requirements changed in November 2025. Had that happened several years ago, we would have either used the 23 lead money or applied for additional years in there. But being able to pay for water mains along with service lines is an absolute game changer for being able to get that money out the door and practical projects. Because the time to replace service lines is when you're replacing the main. That's a great way for actual projects to happen. So that eligibility change is great. It came a little late in the 5-year funding cycle for us to make full use of it. To their credit, EPA made that eligibility change based on feedback from states that the money is not moving that quickly. We're still working on inventories and that sort of thing. And it's only paying for the service lines. So that has changed, but we don't get to reapply for the money we didn't apply for in 24 and 25.
Lots of additional context there, but for us, the goal line is still not, we don't even know where that is yet.
Yeah.
And
Projects will still be eligible for our general funding. So if there's service line replacement, we will be able to fund them. It doesn't have to be the special lead money, but the lead money had its own priority list, so its own priority ranking. It also had higher forgiveness. So in the future, that demand you're talking about will have to come out of our general funding, along with all the other drinking water projects.
thanks, Sammy. So we're at 1:30 when, officially the public comment period starts, or opportunity. Craig, you had your hand up. I don't know if you're.
No, I put it back down. It was more just related to whether Ben is going to be doing some more road shows about trying to educate the water systems on the subsequent phases. I think the division did a really good job of educating everybody on the inventories, but it led everyone to believe the inventories was the only part of the story. And I think that story needs to be continued to be told, even if there isn't this money available. I honestly believe a lot of people think they're done with it because their inventory is over, no matter how much people tell them that there's next stuff to go. And then the dirty little secret of what validation is going to require when you do actually get to the end. I share Harry's concern that this is going to hit at the wrong time. Not that it's anybody's fault. But I think the more we can press upon those systems that there are these things hanging there, and the more they are proactive with it, the better off they will be.
a third of our services still aren't identified.
So, This is great question and answer. We were feedback is great. Certainly would more than welcome any written formal comments.
Is there a mechanism where this $50 million getting transferred to clean water can be dedicated to trying to help communities deal with the lead and copper rule?
I mean, communities can deal with the lead and copper rule today through the SRF. So, and
They thought they were done.
those funds are loan funds.
But
So,
they thought they were done. Now the rules are changing.
right. So the SRF will be here. So we all hope and pray in the years ahead. Those communities, can potentially come to the DWSRF for funding, depending on the relative demand between the two programs. Funds can be transferred back. We're hopeful that the federal capitalization grants continue, and there's repayment funds come in, interest comes in. So, and priority criteria can change. If down the road there's an identified need to revise those priority criteria to help those communities deal with lead and copper rule, that's a possibility.
More challenged with the same size pie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there anybody who would like to provide specific formal public comment now? And we'll take it in writing through August 25th, which is next Friday, I believe. No, sorry, Tuesday. We'll close the business Tuesday. We'll be responding to all comments and doing the best we can to revise all these outstanding issues in the final utilities plan regarding repayments and planning loans, etc. Really appreciate you all taking the time to join the presentation. Great feedback. Thank you. I'll be sticking around just in case someone happens to show on online who isn't here now and wants to offer some comment.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you all. Yeah. I think it's muted.